I often have a lot of theological this and that to tell you in my sermons. But today, as we're considering what it means to be a people of sanctuary, I just wanted to tell you a bunch of stories. Like, have you ever realized that you were being made fun of from a distance? I think it's like almost a universal sensation when you just realize that someone is pointing and laughing at you. It's so universal a feeling that in 2010, I was at a wedding banquet in Guba, Azerbaijan, which is just north of Iran, and I realized it was happening. I was at this wedding with the Azeri family that I was living with that summer, and my comprehension of the Azeri language was okay. I could pretty much figure out what people were saying to me, but my own command of vocabulary was like that of a 3-year-old, so I couldn't really respond much, or at least not significantly. So when my 5-year-old host nephew had whispered to me earlier in the day in Azeri, "Senen pisen pistir," which means, "Your clothes are bad." The only thing I could respond was "Sen pisen," which means "You're bad." The cultural differences were profound. Not that one, though. By the time dinner was served, I had already made a number of appetizer-related faux pas. Cherries had been served, and being polite, I spit out the pits onto the edge of my plate until my neighbor discreetly but pointedly handed me the ashtray, which was full of cigarette ashes and cherry pits, because why would you spit your nasty food trash back onto your clean plate in front of everyone? Rude. And I was being watched. I was conscious of being watched. I was equal parts spectacle and liability, in that I literally couldn't speak for myself, and during the course of the wedding, my little host nephew had in fact brought over a number of other children to look at me. And my bad clothes. The final straw came when I noticed not 2 children, but 2 grown women sitting across the table from me. I didn't know them, but I did know that they were making fun of me. And I was sensitive to the fact that it was probably because I was doing something wrong. At any given moment in Azerbaijan, I probably was. So I said, "Hello, how are you?" Which is, the best I could do. They stopped talking. They looked at each other. You know that look. And one of them leaned forward and said, "Didn't your mother teach you not to eat with your left hand?" This is a banquet hall, not a bathroom. Grow up. Now, I am left-handed, but at that moment, I was so overcome with shame, tears sprung to my eyes. I could feel myself getting red in the face, despite trying as hard as I could not to. And everyone at the table turned and looked at me to see what I would do. I switched my fork to my right hand, and I said, as best I could, "I am so sorry, I do not know these things." At which point my host sister, Hoshkadam, turned to her and said, "Who are you, the Queen of Manners?" She said, "You know what, Miriam? You are in everyone's business all the time. You've got something to say about everyone except yourself, don't you? What if I ate with my left hand? You want to say something to me about it?" She was speechless. And Hoshkadam turned back to me and said, "You are a guest here. You can eat with whichever hand you like. Don't listen to her." And she ate with her left hand for the rest of the meal. That is sanctuary. There are so many forms of sanctuary in this world, so many ports in a storm, so many bridges over troubled water, but perhaps the most intimate is the sanctuary we find in each other, even unexpectedly. That feeling of meeting another's eyes or feeling another's hand on yours and knowing right away that you are safe. That feeling is unlike any other. Being safe with someone is not the same as being understood. No one in Azerbaijan understood me most of the time, but I could be safe. And sometimes I think that understanding one another is overvalued. And we talk a lot here about understanding and practicing understanding, and I think it is important, but it's not everything. I realize that's a bold claim, but I have some evidence. So in addition to working here, some of you know, I'm also in my second internship as a hospital chaplain. I spend half my time at the church and half my time at the hospital. And that job, contrary to popular opinion, involves almost no conversion, which would not be our style anyway. It involves some praying, but mostly a lot of sitting and listening. One of the big lessons that I've taken away from that work has been that I can't possibly understand what most people are going through. But I can be with them while they're going through it. I can be with them on what is sometimes the worst day, the first day, or the last day of their lives. There are levels of human suffering that can only be accessed by direct participation. You need to be going through it. And when I sit with a family whose loved one is being taken off of life support, I do so knowing that I don't have access to that level of pain. And yet I can accompany them. And it is an honor. When I first started my chaplaincy work, I'd get called to the emergency room for a trauma like a gunshot wound or a motorcycle accident. And I'd be standing in the corner, which is like the official position of chaplains in hospitals worldwide, while nurses and doctors and surgeons rushed around, trying to stop the bleeding, cutting apart the person's clothes, ordering tests. And I would think, wow, I am the most useless person in this room. Like if I could just be holding a tray of the extra gauze or something, or holding out a tray of instruments, or even just being the person in charge of like opening and closing the curtain, I would feel better about my role here. And then the day came when the family didn't make it to the hospital in time. And I sat with them while they cried, waiting to take them to see the body, to accompany them. And one of them said, "I just can't believe he died alone. We don't even know if he suffered. We don't even know what it was like." And I said, I was there. I was with him. And she fell into my arms. I never doubted my place in the ER again. I once got paged to a room, and before I could ask the nurse what was going on, the nurse said, "Thank God, the chaplain," which is never a good sign. Even for the chaplain. She pulled back the curtain, shoved me in, and closed the curtain behind me. Oh, good. There was a body. There was a family member. The family member turned and looked at me, and without either of us saying anything, fell into my arms. My job is not to hold the extra gauze. My job is to be a sanctuary, and it doesn't require me to understand what has happened, to know what has come between these two people. My job is to just be there. I once attended a death where I said nothing for 4 hours, but held my position in the chaplain's corner. And on his way out, after the person had died, their son unexpectedly hugged me as he was leaving and said, "Thank you for everything you did." And I thought, what? Now, to be clear, I don't just float around the hospital bringing people peace and understanding. The mistakes I make at my job can be staggering. I don't know how many people have cursed you from their deathbed. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that my number is higher. Someone once said to me, "You're making it worse," and then died. That is a true story. It's true. The more time, though, that I spend at the hospital, the more I realize that doing less is, in fact, doing more. When I try to chaplain my hardest, people get annoyed and throw me out and say things like, "You're making it worse." Some things are just unfixable. And the less I do and say, the more I'm able to be a sanctuary. And so this is why I say that we don't need necessarily to understand each other, to be a safe haven for one another. What does it take to be a sanctuary or a people of sanctuary? Surprisingly little, beyond an open heart. And this is a congregation of open-hearted people. Is it not? It is. We come together on Sundays to worship in a room that is literally called a sanctuary. And I'd like you to take a moment to close your eyes if necessary and just feel the presence of those around you who are here with you now. This is a sanctuary. As Unitarian Universalists, our third principle is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. If you get 3 Unitarian Universalists together, you will have 5 different theologies and 1 strong community. As a faith movement, we're pretty good at accepting spiritual diversity among ourselves. One of the major contributors to Unitarian Universalism today was the free thought movement that flourished in the US in the 1800s, and later the humanist movement. Both held up the use of science and reason in human affairs and rejected supernatural explanations of natural phenomena. In other words, these were the early adopters of Darwin's theory of evolution. And in return, the freethinkers, who were, for the most part, explicitly atheist, they were ostracized from their communities. They were shunned by their neighbors and isolated, and often they were legally persecuted for blasphemy and infidelity. The freethinkers banded together in societies, they published their own newspapers, because we do need each other. We need each other for sanctuary. By 1933, it was time for the Humanist Manifesto to be written. The humanists didn't want to get rid of religion, they wanted to save it. They wrote, "The time has come for widespread recognition of the radical changes in religious belief throughout the modern world." They were responding to modernity. They said the time is past for mere revision of traditional attitudes. Science and economic change have disrupted the old beliefs. Religions the world over are under the necessity of coming to terms with the new conditions created by a vastly increased knowledge and experience. The humanists were responding to new discoveries in science, advances in human knowledge and civilization, and yet the manifesto noted that religion has always been here, has always been the means for realizing our highest values and ideals of life. They wrote, "Through all changes, religion itself remains constant in its quest for abiding values, an inseparable feature of human life." And so, unlike the atheist free thinkers, the religious humanists sought not to get rid of religion, but to save it and change it, to turn it into something more modern, where scientific views would be valued, where we can look to each other for salvation from earthly suffering, not looking necessarily to heaven for salvation from eternal peril in hell because of human sin, which didn't make sense to them. And some of this may be sounding familiar to you, if you've come to this church more than once. They held up their reverence for the products of human activity like art and music. Those values have directly influenced us, and I do mean directly because a great number of humanists and freethinkers became Unitarians specifically, and some Universalists. This religious movement of ours gave sanctuary to people who no longer felt that they had any business walking through the doors of a church where they would be damned to hell for questioning, for doubting, for thinking. Now, in America today, the number of spiritual but not religious people continues to grow. Sometimes I think that Unitarian Universalism is the last haven for the religious but not spiritual among us. But as good as we are, Unitarian Universalists, at accepting and encouraging others on their spiritual or not spiritual journeys, I also sometimes think that we're out of practice at being accepted and being encouraged. Unitarian Universalists are sometimes so effusive in our caring and our accepting of others. I have friends who've told me that they stay home from their church when they're having a hard time because they don't want to cry in public or worry their friends. Are you allowed to cry in church? Yes. Are you allowed to cry in church? Yes. Yes. Are you allowed to celebrate in church? Yes. Yes, even if someone's crying nearby? This is a house of hope and memory. We hold in this house all aspects of human life together. The real question is, are you allowed to seek sanctuary in church? Yes. Even if you're not a believer in God? Yes. Even if you're not necessarily a believer in organized religion and you're not sure about all of this? Yes. Even if you are dedicated to being a sanctuary for others, can you find sanctuary here as well? Yes. Now, in Azerbaijan, hospitality is a huge part of their culture. It's a point of pride and it's a point of good manners to take care of strangers. And aside from those two nasty women, and I don't mean that in the positive sense, at the wedding, everywhere I went, I was met with open arms. There is always a pot of tea on the stove. There's always extra cookies in case guests come and we need impromptu snack time. If I unfolded a map in a public square to get my bearings, without fail, someone would come up to me and ask, "Do you need help? Do you need directions?" The first time I successfully haggled with a cab driver in my new language, after we settled on a price, the cab driver said to me, "Good job." Now, people usually assumed that I was from Turkey or Russia. Many Azeris have never met an American. And when I told them where I was from, the top questions I got was, "What's the food like in America? Do you have bread? Do you guys eat normal stuff like salad?" Yes, we do. And the other top question I got was, "Have people been friendly to you here?" Have people been friendly to you here? Imagine someone asking a Guatemalan migrant in the US those same questions. Have people been friendly to you here? One of my aspirations is that we can ask each other that as we model the kind of community we would like to live out in the world. Have people been friendly to you here? Now, I'm a pretty private person. And some years ago, the day my uncle died suddenly, unexpectedly, I was setting up for my home congregation's annual service auction as it happened, and I was actually out buying more snacks for the auction, and I got the phone call. And when I walked back in the church carrying grocery bags absurdly, the only person who was there was Dot Feely. Now, Dot's one of those people that I think is at every church, the person who's dedicated to setting up coffee, knows where every roll of tape and pencil is. Dot's always at the church. And she took one look at me and said, "What's wrong?" And I fell into her arms. Now, I can't understand what other people are going through, but I do know that feeling of needing to fall into another person's arms. It was only possible because of the years we had spent together, making coffee, washing dishes, doing nothing much of anything, just sitting around at the church, hanging out. She never said to me, "You know, Sarah, I am a safe person for you. If it ever comes up, I can be your sanctuary, should you need it. You can be your weakest and most vulnerable in front of me. I am available for falling onto in times of strife." But I knew it instantly, and the truth is, I felt like I could be myself around her, despite our differences in age and income and background, because she was herself around me all those years. And my hope for this congregation, in a month where we are considering what it means to be a people of sanctuary, is that you can be yourself here, not just for you, but for others. Be your whole self, whether you come to church joyously or still feel reluctant about the idea, whether you love coffee hour or you're an introvert and would rather hide in the corner, thank you. I invite you not just to be a sanctuary for others, but to let others here be a sanctuary for you. Not just to accept one another and encourage their spiritual growth, their spiritual diversity, their searching, but to allow yourself to be accepted into the sanctuary of this religious community. Amen. Blessed be.